The GTX 970, a pinnacle at its time for gamers achieving higher graphic fidelity or detail in their games, but after more than a decade of existence, is the GTX 970 a worthy upgrade option or that final missing piece, right, to complete your build? And now when it comes to, say, playing modern games, just what can you come to expect from the GTX 970? Let's find out. If this is your first time to the channel, I welcome you to subscribe with the notification bell turned on. I hit a wall and well, with your help, we can break through it. And now the GTX 970 released in 2014 of September and will be about 10 years old this upcoming September here in 2024. And while there are many add-in board variants or different models you can pick up or find over on the used market, for this 2024 review or just seeing if the GTX 970 has any life left here going forward in 2024, the model we're using is a reference model, a PNY reference model, just a reference model. So it has a blower style cooler on its shroud. So the specs are essentially the same underneath the hood, minus the cooler style being slightly different from what you would come to see in add-in board variants, where they may have a 3-fan or 2-fan cooling solution. But the GTX 970 has 4 GB of GDDR5 VRAM, a little over 1600 CUDA cores, and a boost clock frequency of a little over 1100, which you'll see here in the benchmark videos. We were able to surpass that. It also features a 6+6 PCIe power connection requirement, so that's a con that we're going to discuss a little bit down here in this video, but just a future heads up that you want to make sure you have a power supply unit that does have enough power to power this graphics card or has the right support, say for a 6+6 PCIe power connector. And then to complement the rest of the system, we're going with an ASRock Z370 motherboard paired with an i9-9900K, which is equivalent to about an X470 motherboard, and a 3800X or a 5600X, somewhere along the lines there. And then 32 GB of DDR4 G.Skill Trident Z memory, and then a Corsair RM750 watt power supply unit. And this essentially covers all of the core components that we're going to use going forward, say testing graphics cards of a similar caliber like the GTX 970 on this setup, with the Core i9-9900K still having a lot of life left in that CPU. And now that we have the core system specifications out of the way, let's go over the benchmarks. So let's review the benchmarks really fast here to see what were some of the results at the different, setting configurations in each of the 7 games we tested out here on this system. right. Now let's take a look at Forza Horizon 5, which honestly fared really well here at both medium and high settings or max settings, with the average frame rate hovering just a little over 60 at max settings, and then turning the settings down a little bit, of course, gave us a bump in numbers across the board, creating a much better or smoother experience, at least in Forza Horizon 5, giving you a net average frame rate of just a little over 70, and the minimum and 1% lows looking much better at that mixed medium to high graphic setting configuration. And then Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is a graphically demanding game, but one I thought that was appropriate to throw here in the mix. But again, looking at Assassin's Creed Valhalla's numbers at their max settings, didn't look all that impressive or all that great, and probably wouldn't be playable to many, or you would experience a lot of stutters and just frame rate drops, which could completely take you out of the immersion experience when playing a super immersive game, an RPG like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But when we turned down the graphic settings once again and didn't max out everything, just kind of had a mixed bag of medium to high, the outcome was much better, faring an average frame rate of just a little over 60 or at 60, with the minimum and 1% lows still hovering about 50. And again, this could create a problem once there is a lot of action going on screen. So that's just something to consider if you want to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla on the GTX 970. You may have to compromise in some areas. And then Far Cry 6, which at first I was a little apprehensive to even adding it into the benchmarks, but I wanted to almost show the worst case scenario for the GTX 970 and show some of its limiting factors when it comes to wanting to play a wide variety of graphically demanding games. But essentially Far Cry 6 was only tested at 1280 by 720p because there wasn't enough VRAM to run the game at 1920 by 1080p. And looking at the on-rail synthetic benchmark, to me the game did not look as great as 720p, looking slightly washed out at times. It did have an average frame rate of a little over 90 FPS, and the minimum and 1% lows looking even better at just a little over 70, but the overall quality of life or the graphics in the game did not look all that impressive at all. And then Red Dead Redemption 2, another game that did not score as well when you jacked up the graphics on the GTX 970, running into that VRAM limiting buffer, with most games running at 1080p taking at least a little over 3 gigabytes, even if that's at a lower graphic fidelity. But Red Dead Redemption 2 ran in the low 40s and low 30s once you turn up all the graphic settings. Again, this game is a slow burn, like adventure, open world RPG like game, so this could suit most gamers, but for the most part you still will feel the dips, and it could very much well interrupt your gaming sessions. But when you introduce a mixed bag of graphics, we got much better results on the GTX 970 in Red Dead Redemption 2, running at close to 60 FPS on average, and the minimum 1% lows being better at this graphic fidelity at a little closer to 50 FPS on average. And then there's GTA 5, which this game can essentially be ran on a lot of different configuration, and arguably the GTX 970 could potentially be overkill. But if you're a gamer, if you're someone who's looking to say role play in GTA and you want a system that could really take advantage of the detail that you can squeeze out of GTA 5, then the GTX 970 could very much well be for you, because GTA 5 on this configuration and at a mixed bag of settings ran really well, a little over 100 FPS at the average frame rate at a mixed medium or graphic setting, and then close to 90 and 60 FPS in the average frame rate and the minimum and 1% lows once you turn everything up or ran the graphic settings at about very high to high, somewhere along the lines there. And then I also wanted to kind of take a step back into 2014, and I wanted to introduce a game that was the game of the year when this graphics card released, when the GTX 970 was released in 2014. So Dragon Age Inquisition was game of the year in 2014, and the GTX 970 at 1080p ran this game flawlessly, averaging over 100 FPS and decent minimum and 1% lows once you turn the graphic settings down a little bit more, because things would dip once there was a lot of action going on scene, or there were like a lot of different enemies and just, you know, magic spells being cast and just a lot of different animations and graphics being displayed on screen. So this did dip the minimum and 1% lows once everything was turned up. But once you introduced again a mixed bag of graphic settings, a theme you're going to continuously actually see play out here as we go over the rest of the benchmarks. And then of course, another game that you can typically find on most systems or on a targeted list for most gamers looking to transition from, say, a console over onto a lower end or a very, comfortable or just compromising system, one that features an older legacy graphics card like the GTX 970, we had to throw Fortnite into the mix. And essentially, Fortnite only had to be tested at one resolution, and that was at 1920 by 1080p. Because essentially, once we start lowering the graphics settings, we also start to leverage the CPU a bit more once we start to, say, lower the texture quality or other areas like post-processing and other settings that affect your GPU. I mean, once we did that, Fortnite ran exceptionally well at the average, minimum and 1% lows. Everything looked well, averaged over 100 FPS, over 160 FPS on average, and close to over 130 FPS at the minimum, and 1% lows close to 100 as well. So very well-rounded numbers, especially given that I am testing the system on a 144 hertz monitor to just really see if we're leveraging the refresh rate, or if our graphics card and our CPU combined can fully take advantage of that refresh rate and give us a smooth gaming experience. And essentially, the GTX 970 did, at least in our tests and at least in our initial setups here with this configuration. A few pros is that the GTX 970 can be picked up for around or about 50 USD on both local markets and over on eBay, given what the climate of the market is. But you could pick up this graphics card in abundance. Another pro is that it's not typically, or it wasn't typically, a graphics card that was mined on. So you should just come to expect typical end user behaviors, just gaming and being maybe enclosed in a case, maybe being exposed to dust here and there, but nothing rigorous or subjecting the graphics card to a use that it wasn't originally designed for. Another pro is that the GTX 970 has support for multi-monitors. So if you're someone young and looking to break through into content creation, or you want to break into streaming and you want multiple different monitors to help you manage or really improve the quality of your stream, then you can also look at the GTX 970 as an affordable entry-level graphics card, being that the GTX 970 has support for 3 1.2 display ports and 1 HDMI port and 1 DVI should you feel the need to use that. But you have a wide range of different input-output options you can use to take advantage or to enhance your setup or your gaming experience should you want to use 2 different monitors and you're into like simulation-based games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, or you want to play games like Forza Horizon 5. And then there are a few cons, right? Minus its age, minus this graphics card being about 10 years old, coming from 2014. But here on this channel, we are fans of legacy hardware or legacy components. But one of the cons is that you will have to initially invest or consider investing in a decent power supply unit to power this graphics card and your CPU. So it does have a 6+6 power connector requirement. I mean, it's not much to go off by, but in MSI Afterburner, we were registering about 120 watts from the graphics card, which is about on par with this TDP, with having a maximum TDP of around 143 watts or somewhere along the lines there. I mean, temperatures were also fine. We did test the system on essentially an open air setup or with the door off, but this rig here, this configuration does have really good airflow. But temperatures were fine, in my opinion, given that the card hasn't had its thermal paste replaced, at least not by me. I did buy the graphics card a while back from someone on the Facebook Marketplace. But that's also a con that you just have to take into consideration and factor that the GTX 970 that you may pick up, while also came from around the 2014 era, the GTX 970 that you picked up may run a little hot and may require you to either seek aid in replacing the thermal paste or just cleaning the internals, or you learn how to do it yourself. So that is a con and something that you have to take into consideration. Another con is that you are essentially limited to just 1920 by 1080p medium to high settings in most of, if not all of your games. This may not be a problem for many, but it very much could be a problem for most. It all depends on the type of games you play and how you wish to experience them. And that kind of answers the question when presented, who is this card for? Who is the GTX 970 for in 2024? Someone who's into playing games that aren't graphically demanding, games along the lines of, say, like Minecraft and Fortnite and Warzone and what have you, and others, games somewhere along the lines of a similar class. and you're willing to take the risk. You're willing to take the risk to see if you can capture the reward. The reward is finding that used price to performance value, getting the most out of components, or finding the value in hardware that somebody else has already used up. So that user or that seller could be coming from that GTX 970, and now they saved up and they were able to say upgrade to an RTX 3070 or somewhere along the lines there. A side con is that no, you won't have access to those features, but that's still very much a niche subject here in the tech world. So you're not really missing out on much, especially if you're playing games that don't even support RTX or ray tracing features. But another pro tip that I will share with you, and that is if you are considering a GTX 970, I do recommend you consider pairing the graphics card with a fast CPU, and that way you can leverage low setting or 1080p low setting gaming, and you won't necessarily take a hit with your FPS, that you still are able to leverage the CPU to get the job done. Somewhere along the lines of a CPU like we tested today, the Core i9-9900K, is still very much capable CPU, and one that we very much probably will revisit here on the channel. But the GTX 970 does get a pass here from your boy Tech with Terrence in 2024. I do recommend this graphics card if you're able to find it on the used market. Just shop smart and be aware of scammers, and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's all I got for this one, y'all. If you haven't checked and you're new to the community, first hit the like button for me, but also subscribe with the notification bell turned on. But that's all I got for this one, y'all. I do hope to catch you all in the next one. So until then, be easy.